The OECD's latest report card shows Australian public spending on education reduced by nearly 2% from 2019 to 20, despite average OECD spending going up. Pasi Sahlberg is a professor of education at Southern Cross University. He says thousands of Australian public schools are underfunded.
Of course, it's an alarming headline, but I think we need to be careful in looking at this the report. First of all, we are talking about a very early part of the COVID, the first year, and the data that the OECD is providing about this particular issue is not complete. There's only a handful of countries, but I think that the indication that the report is showing that at the same time when the government spending has gone up almost 10%. Here in Australia, the spending on education has been declining, and that should be, of course, different direction. But I would say that we need to wait for the further data from further years. Everybody remembers that here in Australia, we didn't really have the COVID affecting education schools the same way it had in many other countries. So let's wait another year to see what these figures really look like. But the initial direction, of course, is not good.
Okay, so overall, how does Australia compare to OECD countries with the percentage amount of GDP or whatever the measure is that is allocated to education?
Yeah, we are looking at the data that comes every year, so there are no big changes in these trends. Australia has been during the last 10 years really in the similar situation that we are spending we are probably on the top quarter of the OECD countries when it comes to how much money overall is going to primary and secondary education. But what makes Australia different is that almost 20%, 1/5 of that money that goes to primary and secondary schools in this country comes from Joe, your pockets and mine, the parents who are contributing to the education. And what makes Australia also very much outlier among the OECD countries is that it doesn't matter really which education sector your children go to, whether it's a private or Catholic or public schools, everybody pays money for that. So that's where we are different, that we spend much more private money from parents' pockets to education compared to most other OECD countries.
So go into that in a bit more detail for us. What is the public-private split in Australia compared to other countries?
If we look at the primary and secondary schools, not including universities or tertiary sector, it's about 80% that comes from the public funding. Of course, we have about 63% currently of all the children going to public schools, but 80% of the total funding is from public, because the public money is also going to non-governmental schools, and then it leaves the rest up to 20% of the funding that comes from private sources of parents. And this is something that has been steadily increasing. Also, the spending, when the education spending is going up, it's in the countries like Australia, it's often influenced by the increasing private share of the schools that parents are paying. We know very well here that during the last 15, 20 years, the private school cost, the expenses have tripled, which of course we can see in these figures as well.
How do you think that reflects on the Australian education system?
Yeah, it's good to say. Of course, there's very little room for argument saying that this type of market-based, privatized education system would be good for the country and nation when it comes to education. I think we have been declining as a nation when it comes to education outcomes, and it's probably has something to do with the way the education is organized. I think the real problem, again, that makes Australia very different is that we continue to send money to non-government schools that don't often need that. Many of them are overfunded at the same time when almost all of the 7,000 government schools in this country remain underfunded. And I think it's, this formula makes it very difficult to have a world-class education system where we would truly give every child in this country a fair go through education.
So do you believe there needs to be a fundamental rethink of the allocation of public funding to the education systems, public and private, through the nation?
I think I'm not alone in this. There are many, probably most people in this country would like to see that the government public schools would be fully funded and fairly funded. so that we can really, walk the walk and promise good world-class education system for everyone. If we look at the OECD, this report and the data that comes with it, it's very clear that there's no other country that aims to, be the world-class and recognized education nation with a similar policy. So we need to think very carefully where the taxpayers' money will go, and I think most people believe that let's properly full fund all the 7,000 public schools here, and if there's money left, then we can think about what to do with that. But this is an unsustainable situation, the way education system is funded, if we want to be on the top of the world, where I think we should be in education.
So can you quantify that for us at all? How many millions or billions, as far as you're concerned, needs to be redirected from private schools to public schools in Australia per year?
I cannot say exactly the numbers, of course, but the interesting thing is that we are already funding schools. If we look at the total funding, private and public funding to Australian primary and secondary schools, that we, as I said, we are already on the top quarter of the OECD countries when it comes to how much funding and resources we put into the system. So I would argue that we have enough money there to make sure that every single school would be a good school. So there needs to be just a careful consideration of the balance